Welcome to part 3 of managing conflict and power. So, thus far we've talked about, well, what is conflict, what is power, and some different ways that we can handle conflict. What are some more positive ways of handling conflict versus some not so great ways of handling conflict, as well as some differences between gender and cultural expectations during conflict. But now let's talk about, well, how do we handle conflict when it's mediated through technology? Keep in mind that when I mention technology, this can be through text messaging, through social media, even through email. So, whenever you get a message of any kind and you feel as though conflict is arising, first and foremost, wait and reread. Why should you wait? Well, it goes back to the Jefferson strategy. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, counting all the way to 10 gives us a moment to rethink what actually happened instead of that immediate response of, wait, what did he say to me? What did she say to me? And be mindful to go over what you've read the first time. There have been countless times, and I'm sure you are probably in the same boat, where I've read something and I thought that they were angry, or I thought they were saying something hurtful, and then I thought about it in different contexts, and I realized it wasn't meant to be hurtful, it wasn't meant to be mean. I always have a friend who will say a backhanded joke, jokes that have a slight dig in there, and then he'll put LOL. And I realize, okay, maybe to me it sounds like a backhanded joke, but to him it's just a joke. So again, go back, read over what you just read, and do a perception check. Why would a rational human being say these words to me? If there's any other reason for why they may say it, maybe they could be happy, they could be sad, they could be angry, and maybe you're just misreading the context. This gives you another opportunity to reevaluate, are you actually in a conflict? Furthermore, assume the best. Think about the fact that most people are not going to try to have conflict with you on a technologically based form. But with that said, you also need to watch out for the worst. As you know, there are people who are known as trolls, who actively try to engage you in conflict through technology. So, while I would say assume the best, think that most people are going to be in their best behavior, that they really want what's best for you, that they don't want to engage in conflict, we do have to think about watching out for the worst. Now let's say this is a really big conflict. You can seek outside counsel. Now that doesn't mean that necessarily you have to go to a therapist or a lawyer. It can even just mean going to a friend. Going to someone who's not associated with the conflict directly and having them look over what was said or what was done through technology. They may be able to perceive something that you can't see, that you can't read into the situation. This can even work for small conflicts as well. Make sure that you weigh out your options carefully. Do you really need to respond here? If the answer is no, then maybe it's in your best interest just to avoid, then that may be the best option. But maybe you can't avoid the situation. Maybe you actually have to face this head on. In that case, what ways can you address the issue in a way that's assertive and respectful, not only of the other person, but also of yourself? And then last but not least, remember to communicate competently. Now we've talked about communicating competently throughout the entire semester, so there are many ways that you can think about that. But remember that as you're crafting your response, whether it be through typing it or maybe even voice messaging it, remember that you need to think about what is appropriate. Use I language that's going to reflect how you are feeling about the situation without placing the blame on the other person, which is going to be you language. Remember that you think about how you're expressing your emotions, what kind of perspective you're taking. Again, being mindful that competent communication is going to get you a lot further than incompetent communication. Now, there are different ways that people resolve conflict. One way is by separation. This is when somebody immediately just withdraws from the conversation through the conflict overall, and they need to get away. I would say that if the emotion is very, very high and things are getting very, very heated, this may be a good short-term resolution. Because one, it gets you out of the room or gets you in a different space mentally and emotionally, so that way you don't have to deal with the conversation or the encounter right away. But keep in mind that you still need to address the issue. So don't let the separation last too long. But also remember that separation can be negative, especially if someone needs you to address the emotion and the feelings right then and there. And if you're just avoiding, that's negative. Then there's domination. So if you are dominating, remember this is what we are going to call a win-lose situation. This is where someone is trying to get their way and the other person is not going to get their way. This is going to be the competitor working against the accommodator. Again, that can lead to cumulative annoyance and hostility on both sides. Then there's compromise. So this is a short-term conflict resolution in the fact that nobody fully gets what they want. So both parties will have to amend and change what they think and what they're going to do to get some of what they want. So going back to the phrase, compromise is the best policy, remember that compromise is a draw. Not fully a win, not fully a loss. Because you're getting some of what you want, but not all of what you want. And if you're constantly always compromising, especially in the moments where you don't want to compromise, that can also lead to cumulative annoyance and some resentment. Next is integrative agreements. This is where our collaboration comes back into play, where you and the other party mutually try to figure out what works for both of us. How do we both get our win-win in this situation? Again, as I mentioned in the last video, collaboration can be easier said than done. And lastly, structural improvements. So for a short-term conflict resolution, this recognizes that, hey, either there's a power imbalance here that we need to renegotiate, or there are expectations that we need to renegotiate in this relationship. Now this can be very healthy, especially if maybe one party or both parties didn't fully understand the expectations that the other had for how they conduct their relationship. But this can also be a healthy moment in the fact that you see, oh, here's a place where we can build and reflect. As well as short-term conflict outcomes, there are going to be some long-term conflict outcomes. So let's say that there is avoidance, where you just never actually address the issue. You're just like, conflict, I don't see it, I'm going to pretend like it doesn't exist. No conflict exists here in this house. Overall, that's going to lead to dissatisfaction. No one's going to be happy. Remember that this is our we lose. Then there's reactivity. Remember that reactivity is the explosive anger. That you don't really think about what you're doing or saying, you just go into it with emotion. Usually because reactivity is going to be more on the side of angry emotion as opposed to happier emotion, then this is going to lead to dissatisfaction as well. Because, again, you're not really addressing the problem as much, and so it can be another we lose. Keep in mind that avoidance is very passive and reactivity is very aggressive, but then you have collaboration, which is assertive. Now, as a long-term effect, this is going to give you satisfaction because both parties are mutually trying to figure out what works for both parties. The win-win. When it comes to accommodation and competition, this can be risky. I've known couples, friends, coworkers who have accommodation and competition and work off that very well, where one person makes the decisions and the other person goes along with it. And that's great for their relationship. But it can be really, really risky, especially when one person feels like they're always having to give in. Or even if one person feels like they always have to make all the decisions. Cumulative annoyance and resentment are very, very easy to come in here. So as we think about conflict and all the ways that we can handle it, we also have to acknowledge the challenges that come with that. For example, our self-enhancing thoughts. Most of the time when we enter conflict, we try to think about what is best for us individually, not what's best for us as a pair, or as a couple, or as friends, or as coworkers. We usually think, well, why is that person so mean to me? I've done nothing wrong. Why is he lying to me? Why is she being so disrespectful? Why are they completely unaware of how I feel about this? If they really cared about me, they would think more about who I am and why this is important to me. Again, we focus in on ourselves. Again, the self-enhancing thought. So be mindful of how that's a challenge. It's really hard to collaborate and try to mutually work what's beneficial for both parties if we're focusing in on ourselves and only ourselves. Next, we have destructive messages. These are the messages, the statements, the comments that we make that in the moment may feel really good because we're hurting the other person who's hurting us back, but in essence can destroy the entire relationship. An example of those would be sudden death statements, such as, "Why are we even together? I never thought this would last anyway. We're so different." Those comments can make a relationship go from just being in conflict to suddenly ending. There's even those dirty secret destructive messages. These are the ones that we've been hiding, we've been holding back because we knew if we said it out loud, we may hurt our partner's feelings, and we wanted to protect them. So that can be everything from, "Yeah, I lied to you last week," or even, "I haven't really ever loved you." Again, keep in mind how destructive that could be to hear that in a conflict. Then we have serial arguments. These are those arguments that never, ever get resolved, and so over time, it's just a series of unresolved disputes. Same issue, different day. Then there's physical violence. Now, I don't have to go into too much depth to tell you why this is a challenge to handling conflict, but be mindful when there is a threat of physical violence, conflicts don't get resolved. Typically, after so much physical violence in a relationship, the chilling effect occurs. The chilling effect basically lets us know that you may be less likely to deal with a conflict or something that's causing you pain or hurt in a relationship because you are afraid of the consequences of physical violence. So again, physical violence is a very destructive tool that some people use in their relationships, but it's the ultimate sign of disrespect. And then there's even those unsolvable disputes. Now, sometimes disputes happen and no matter what you do, no matter what you say, you will just never, ever be able to solve them. Be mindful of the fact that sometimes you can agree to disagree, but sometimes the best answer here is to say, well, it's time for this relationship to end. That can also be a very healthy option as well. So when it comes to managing conflict and power, make sure that you have opportunities to engineer positive change, that you try to strive for healthy outcomes as opposed to negative outcomes. Again, like I said just earlier, if the healthiest thing to do is to end the relationship or to walk away, then aim for that as your positive change. Be mindful that the outcome is always going to be dependent on how you interpersonally communicate. So if you react with reactivity or with avoidance, that will have a different outcome than if you react through collaboration. So that completes part 3 of managing conflict and power.